Pete, while we got you on here, and I want to ask you a couple of questions about being a drill sergeant.
Yep.
And
yeah, sorry to keep segueing.
I want to make sure we get that while I got you, bud. So you were a drill sergeant for what? For 2 years?
2 years.
And what was the drill sergeant academy? I'm guessing it's all the fun of basic training, but they're also teaching you how to be a drill sergeant at the same time. You kind of told me some highlights of it while you're going through it, but
well, I say it's like going through basic training again, except now you're old, so everything hurts more.
Okay.
Like I went to a chiropractor 4 times while I was at the drill sergeant academy. So for those keeping track, I've spent more time at a chiropractor during that 9-week course than I did outside of that 9-week course before or after.
Why did you get selected to be a drill sergeant?
I got selected to be a drill sergeant because I'm one of the few people in my MOS who's not on a permanent profile.
What is the typical criteria for selection by the Department of the Army?
So to be to take off my self-deprecation cape, so when I first got selected, I had the same response that every well-meaning douchebag has had when they hear that I was a drill sergeant, which is like, this is a mistake. I don't see myself as a drill sergeant. I could rant about that forever, and I probably have on your show about 90 times. But the point is, I was like, this is a mistake. Like, no one would ever pick me to be a drill sergeant, maybe a recruiter, but not a drill sergeant. And I looked at the what they're looking for. So it was like, all right, let's see. I've got a college degree. I've deployed. I've done overseas time. I've done my force comm time. Let's see, what other things? I have a high GT score. I at the time especially had a high PT score. I had good NCOERs. I'm like, no, actually, I think I do meet the criteria for this. Oops. It should have shammed.
You should have had extra donut.
Like the thing is, I was like, at the time that it happened too, it was such an interest, because I actually had a choice. So I was chosen, but I had a choice because I had less than 2 years left on my contract, and it's a 2-year minimum to be a drill sergeant. So I could have signed a deck statement, which is just you saying my career's over. Let me finish up my contract. Nothing else will happen in my Army career. Which I think is, I was even at a point in my life where I was like, listen, you've done enough time in the Army, you've got enough experience, you've got enough contacts. You know what, if you chose to get off this ride now, it's perfect time. But I also was writing GI Low, and I was like, oh, this is too interesting not to pursue. I write this comic about a sergeant, and the thing is, I was also, and the two of you can definitely identify with this, what makes your writing different than other people in your genre? And it's like, okay, I needed something to distinguish myself from the pack, because what I was doing with GI Low at the time, especially, was it was just the same sort of observations, like, oh, motor pool Mondays suck, come here, the barracks suck, come here. I'm like, okay, everyone else is doing this. And then I was like, wait a minute, a drill sergeant storyline, especially like not like the scary, angry drill sergeant, but like the minutia of drill sergeant life. Like, that's funny to me. And I was like, I could be the one person doing that. And thankfully I was.
Because in a lot of media, right? Like I was telling Nick about this, the previous episode we recorded. I kind of have this theory, because you see people writing about the military today for TV or movies, they're going off stories their grandparents told them about what basic training was like. And from what I remember from drill sergeants, they're more of a intense, hyperbolic, extreme version of an NCO, right? Like they're big and broad, and it just seemed like it was kind of, a lot of it was, I say performance in the way that a performance in that, like, you're portraying this character as drill sergeant, almost like an acting exercise. And a lot of the TV, a lot of the media people see, they only see NCOs writ large as this sort of larger than life drill sergeant. And they, like, they'll say, oh, it's like Full Metal Jacket. Oh, it's like whatever. But
By the way, Gunny Hartman deserves a review because first off, that man was hilarious. Second off, you know what? I think he actually cared about his recruits. Until he got shot in the bathroom.
Yeah.
The fact that Lee Ermey actually knew what he was doing kind of helps that whole situation too.
I think that because the thing is, the character is meant to be almost antagonistic. Because I've heard people people who say it's an anti-war movie, and they're like, it's like this is the horrors and indoctrination. Like, Gunny's hysterical. It's like I was just gonna say, he's funny. Like I was like, he reminds me of a good I was never in the Marines, but he sounds like a good drill sergeant. I'm just saying, he's doing his job and he's teaching them. He's getting through to them, and then he pushes one of them too far. But
have you seen Pete Hacksaw Ridge?
I have. I liked it. I'm not crazy about it, but I liked it. Character. Vince Vaughn was very good in that. Because he knew when to be funny.
Yeah. And that's an example of how movies can portray drill sergeants. And then the thing was, the drill sergeant aspect made a lot of sense to me there for Vince Vaughn. However, your drill sergeant doesn't go off to war with you. He stays there and trains soldiers.
Yeah, that one. I'm not sure if that was just so they could keep Vince Vaughn on the cast list, or if that's maybe how it was. Because the thing is, back in the 40s, it was not a drill sergeant. It was just you had a sergeant who trained you, and for all I know, maybe they did then deploy with you. But the idea of what we imagine the drill sergeant, drill instructor is, that was created in the 1960s.
Yep.
Okay.
Sure. I remember, if I remember my history correctly, you probably know more about this, Pete, as well. Obviously,
I should know more.
I was about to say, having been taught it, I'm pretty sure the whole thing where it's the whole modern system where units are trained as one unit in basic and then sent to their final posting after training is done. That started during Vietnam, because up until then it was basically, hey, you get trained with the same unit all the way through training, and then they send you to war with that unit. That was around all the way from the Civil War.
Yeah, well, I think it's a bigger military. Obviously, warfare changes because it's not you're going to the Eastern Front or the Western Front. It's a lot more okay, well, there's obviously got to be the rear D element that's going to stay behind and work, or there's people doing 24 operations back in the home front. Or the fact, after World War II, it was we suddenly had bases over be stationed in Italy or Germany or something like that. That's got its own purpose, and what does that do to support overseas operations? So I think in that sense, it's all right, the idea is to spread you as wide and far as possible.
Yep.
I also might be talking in my butt here. I think another research.
I think another thing that affected it, if I remember correctly, is just the fact that in Vietnam there was so many people had the issue of replacements was such a bigger thing, was such a bigger deal, because you'd have guys who get injured or get killed and be taken out of the unit, and they'd have to bring in replacements. So basically, you had a whole unit where half the guys were not part of the original unit, so it sort of just eventually fell off as a practice. If I'm remembering correctly. But I'm probably talking out my butt too, because
there's a lot of talking out the butts here.
I'm not even going on stuff that I was taught. I'm just going off experience. I'm going off Ken Burns' Vietnam War documentary or some shit like that.
Well, if you watch the entire Ken Burns Vietnam series, you've got one up on me, because I've not. I watched his Ernest Hemingway, and mostly left feeling wow, that guy was kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. With Hemingway, I read The Sun Also Rises after I got my appendix taken out, and I was high as a kite on codeine that was prescribed. And I'm reading this, and I'm like, well, this is just kind of this is just people, this is people who can't decide if they want to date each other in France.
All right, I read that book at the right time in my life. I was studying abroad in Europe, and I was in my 20s, and it was just sort of oh my God, this is so my life. But if I read it in my 30s, I'd be like, guys, get over yourselves.
I mean, yeah, Clerks, the movie Kevin Smith's Clerks hits the hardest when you're 25. When you're 25 and you don't have to do with your life.
I love that Clerks is Your Sun Also Rises. I'm not even saying that to sound condescending. That's very Derwin.
Well, I read The Sun Also Rises, and I'm like, oh, this is an ancient precursor to what Kevin Smith did in Clerks. I could see the parallels there.
Well, actually, it keeps with the theme of like, the nothingness, because Clerks is a story about just people like working a day job having conversations about their generation. Sun Also Rises has no plot either. It's just a bunch of like war vets in Europe going from beautiful European country to beautiful, like, while sleeping with each other and having arguments.
Yeah.
Again, these are writers writing about the nothing, but also kind of trying to capture a moment.
People could change. I think society evolves. I think, and something I'm a fan of. You can look at someone's work and say, oh, well, there's like, there's aspects of it that didn't age very well, but you can appreciate what they did for the culture and how it impacted it, and the good parts there. And then you take the good and you leave the bad in the past.
In between is what you have, the facts of life. The facts of life. There
you go. So Pete, the minutia of being a drill sergeant, that's what kind of fascinates me. What's that?
I tried to document it as well as I could, because like the two of like, with a lot of memories, especially like the really small ones, like the minute they're gone, they get dropped from the core memories. So in the years since I got off the trail, every once in a while, in between people being like, I can't see you as a drill sergeant, go fuck yourselves. People are like, well, tell me a good story of a time you were a drill sergeant, and I've kind of boiled it down to like just like a couple stories. There's like 3 or 4, and I'm like, oh crap, that's where I'm at with my memory. I've just got like a couple core memories, like the time that a kid marched to school with a cup of coffee in his pocket, the time a kid spit blood in my face, the time that 2 of my soldiers had sex in the arms room. The extremes.
Something about having sex around a bunch of guns. I don't know.
They were dummy rifles, so there's probably a metaphor there.
So
he was firing blanks.
So you were an AIT drill sergeant, though, right?
Yeah. So to your point of like, drill sergeant says this extreme character, it's going to be different in an AIT environment, because in a basic training environment, you get them for such a shorter period of time, depending on how long they. So it's you're really kind of defaulting to teacher admin.
Yeah.
And then like when needed, you've got that volume.
It's kind of like I always refer to it as putting on my Sergeant Lester hat, or otherwise I'm just dog. Like that was kind of my switching back and forth. And a few times if someone really fucked up, that I'd kind of lose my shit. Or I tried to do that, keep it like that after I kind of learned how to be an NCO, or my version of being an NCO. So you go through the training to be like you go through the training that will show you how to be I hope this doesn't come off as a pejorative, but as a cartoon character, as the drill sergeant character.
Well, it's fitting because I then turned that character into a literal cartoon character.
Yeah. And like, how big was your platoon?
So I had about 250 at a time.
How do you probably don't even like get to know your soldiers very well if there's 100. That's a company. That's an infantry company, Pete.
So by the way, it was not just me by my lonesome. I mean, I had other platoon sergeants with me, but when you've got a size that big, there are a lot of people you're not gonna know, and a lot of people like the obvious joke of on graduation day you see a soldier like, who are you? It's like, I've been your soldier for 6 months. Oh, okay, cool, you did a good job. But the way I see it is, and this is true, I think anyone who's in a leadership role with that many subordinates, you'll know the bottom 10% and the top 10%, and everything in between is just kind of you. So yeah, I've been fortunate. I've had an opportunity to bump into the top 10% and the bottom 10% since they graduated, and usually the bottom, like if they're still in the army, like they fix their shit and they're like, listen, I'm sorry, I was an asshole to you. I was like, you know what, I was an asshole to you too, let's just move on with our lives.
So with the top 10%, I'm curious, did you, I'm assuming you put them in leadership roles within this massive fucking platoon?
Right. I was kind of I had a perfect track record of anyone I recommended for student first sergeant, they did not get it.
Okay.
while I had a little bit of pull when it came to like my platoon, like who's going to be squad leaders or PGs, I could do that. But student first, I never got my student first picks.
Like, if you've got a company of 250, how many squads do you have? Like 10?
Well, the squads are broken down by class. So it just depends on how many classes you've got in that rotation. And the class size is like, I think the smallest would be like 7 and the largest would be like 18 or something like that.
So you could have 10 squads.
You're forcing me to do math. Yeah, something like that.
Well, as an even number, we could say 10. Hypothetically, it's 10, as much as 10 squads. That wouldn't be out of. This is research for a book we're doing, by the way.
What?
Yeah.
This was a bait and switch.
Well, that's why I said, hey, I wanted to talk to you about being a drill sergeant.
I was saying, Nick, that was a great reaction. I don't know, it just looked like you were like, yeah, we got it.
No, I stretched my arms at weird times. Like, it's this time it worked out.
Oh, no, you should own that. Just, yeah.
So you could have potentially as many as 10 squads. So you could have 10, as we'll say 5 to 10 squad leaders in a humongous platoon. Like I occasionally had a squad of like 6. So 250 is mind-boggling. Like, fuck, that's so many people. So would you have like meetings of squad leaders? Like we get everybody together.
It's the idea of you know, like a breakdown like that is to prepare them for their life in the real army, where I mean, it's very impractical to have 250 people in one room and disseminate information. But you know, if you tell 10 people in a room, okay, tell all of your people this, get this information out there, like you have easy access. That's true of the military. That's true for probably any organization. It's like all delegation. It's all dissemination of information.
Did you get to know your squad leaders, not like on a personal level, but you probably spent way more time with them than you did with the rest of your infinite supply of Joes?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
You had a bunch of NPCs or something.
I mean, like it's important to establish like a rapport with the student leadership while also maintaining like we're not friends. Like I am your boss. But like it's like you would talk differently to them than you would talk to a platoon of 250 people. Just because it's like, listen, you need to make sure that they feel comfortable talking to you. And it's like, listen, if you try to scare away your student leadership, they're not going to come to you, which means unfortunately you cannot give them information. So you try to establish like this like at a distance rapport.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's like it's in circumstances like that, I felt like, okay, I feel better about like joking about that, or like one of my favorite memories. And by the way, said soldier in this story just made the list for staff sergeant, so she's doing good things in the army too. One of my former soldiers is a staff sergeant. That blows my mind. I feel so old. But anyway,
was she a specialist when she went through your platoon?
She may have been. I do not remember. She was one of our best student first sergeants. But I remember she comes up to me we had a half day, so the soldiers got released from class early, and she just goes, "Drill sergeant, I had 84 people just come up to me and say, 'What's the plan for lunch?' What's the plan for lunch?" And I'm like, "We're gonna have lunch. They have to feed us." But it kept coming up to me and saying, "What's the plan for lunch? I now know your pain." And I just looked at her like, "You do. You poor child. You do know what my life is like, being asked the same questions over and over again, when if you just wait, you'll get an answer."
That's funny. So that was a lot of what you did as and not to go into too far at that point, you were a drill sergeant at an AIT for, we'll call it a support MOS.
Correct.
And as in the support MOS as an AIT drill sergeant, it's less teaching people how to charge into a machine gun nest, and it's more teaching them how to function as a platoon, as a squad leader, as a soldier within the sort of the grand support army writ large. And,
it's microcosm army.
Yeah. And
so like, here's the place to make mistakes.
Yeah. It's high school for the army.
Oh, in so many ways. I would say that the thing is, I used to think that in the TRADOC environment, people were acting like high school students because they basically were. But now that I'm away from TRADOC and my following two duty stations, I learned that high school is not an institution. It's not a time frame. Because like I work with 50-year-olds who act like high school students now. I had a soldier in Korea who would pick her enemy of the month, and I'm like, what is wrong with the world? To just be like, oh yeah, we're all not gonna speak to him this month because he yelled at me for being late to work. We're not gonna speak. We're just gonna ignore him. I'm like, what? You're a soldier in the United States Army. Cut the bullshit.
Don't be late. Like,
yeah, we're gonna spread a rumor about him, but he picks his nose in the motor pool. I don't know. That just fucking kid stuff, man. So the point is, I don't think anyone actually quite ever leaves high school. And I'm sure, like, I'm guilty of those moments, or just sort of like, I think for me, it's not so much like the like how I treat people as more just how I cope. Because like in high school, what did I do? It's like, I had a bad day. I'm going to go home and listen to sad music. And now that I'm in my 30s, I'm just like, I'm pain at the disco, but also have knee pain.
I'll have knee pain at the disco.
It's like, wow, Brandon Urie gets me because he's also almost 40 now.
Funny. So as a drill sergeant, and sort of the we'll call it the safety net AIT, or where you can make mistakes. I say that's what I mean by safety net, and it's not quite as like life or death, right, in the support AITs, because I went to the support AITs, is why I say that. And you probably, like, I bet you could just like sit there and people just jabber. You hear all this like stuff about, like, I imagine especially the kids that they think they're slick, they think they're getting by the drill sergeants, and they talk about it, and they don't know you're like 3 feet off camera. You're like, you're just listening to them talk.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's universal because as anyone who's ever been a very young adult, we're talking like 18, 19, we tend to give them this kind of power of like, okay, legally you're adult, but you're also a kid. So you're still kind of stupid and trying to figure out the world, but now you've got the confidence of people telling you you're an adult. Like, I can vote. I know how the world works. So I would have to explain to these soldiers, like, listen, I've been a drill sergeant longer than you've been in the Army. I know how Army works. No, I'm an adult. I know what I can do with my hair.
So as a drill sergeant, did you have a lot of times where you had, I guess, discipline problems is the wrong word. Like, I went through basic.
Problem is probably a great word. There was a lot of problems for 2 years.
Okay, like I went through basic training in 2006 when the drill sergeants would organize people to beat other people up in the showers. So Full Metal Jacket kind of like resonated with me. I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of what it's like sometimes.
I think something that comes to my mind, and this is kind of touching on something that we talked, and I know I haven't talked in a minute, so yeah, here I am. Something that we talked about, you and I, Derwin, when we talked about this before, about the whole, the way NCOs are portrayed in the media, and like war movies and war TV shows and stuff like that, versus how they are in real life, is that, in a lot of, especially media focusing on like the training part of things, whether it's Full Metal Jacket, whether it's obviously the extreme cartoonish cases like Sergeant Zim and Starship Troopers or things like that, they're portrayed like they're the villains, because there needs to be a villain for the primary characters, the narrative characters to butt heads with as they're trying to become, soldiers or whatever, so they can then go off and do the fun things, then make the rest of the movie. And I think listening to you, especially Pete, and obviously listening to you before, Derwin, it's not really that way. It's like in the real world, It's more that, if anything, there is no villain. The villain, if anything, is ignorance or inexperience, and the NCOs are the ones trying to fight ignorance by keeping the, as you say, the dumbass Joes from giving into it or something along those lines. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
Well, no, you're absolutely right, but I think there's something to be said about the presentation, because as an AIT drill sergeant, I had 6 months with these soldiers, so it's a lot more time to kind of dilute it and have more humanity, and for myself and for the soldiers, a lot more nuance to like how we understood each other. Basic training, you've got 9 weeks, and it's like, so it's a lot short period of time, which means you have to be a lot like more brash. But then to talk about like the media that you've seen, the basic training sequence in Full Metal Jacket is only half the movie, so you have to go even bigger. And then if you have a TikTok video, it's going to be even shorter. But the point is, it's like to the point of the two of you writing a book, hopefully using this experience. Like I was kind of curious, like, what is the story? So is like the basic training portion like the whole book, or is it like a chapter? Because either way, you're going to need, it's all about how you present the drill sergeant character in that short period of time.
So basically, I don't know how much you know about the lore of the Halo universe, but the lore of the Halo universe is such that basically the Spartan 2 characters, like John 117 and all those guys, they were abducted as 6-year-olds and abducted into this like top secret like black project where they were then trained as commandos. And they were trained for like 8 years straight to be in like austere conditions and blah, blah, blah. So obviously it's an extreme case. That was like my first experience or my first exposure to that kind of like media. Alphas is a story about a group of kind of similar, like, specialist commandos who are not abducted, but inducted as like preteens. And basically because they wanted to like have them at a very formative age, so they could then train them to be, there's some other stuff that goes into it too that we could get into if you need it for like, like context and such. But basically the gist of it is that the drill sergeant or drill sergeant type characters in this story basically are, I call them the training cadre, because they're not quite like they're not quite.
Well, that's an accurate title. I mean, training cadre is what they are.
Yeah, I mean, but I little thing you may not know about me, I was in ROTC for about 3 months for the Air Force. Yeah, I was in the ROTC for about 3 months back in 2012 for the Air Force. So I know a little bit about that sort of world, just a little bit. Yeah, that's what they call it for us. They call them the cadre, and that's pretty much what they are. And Alphas is this group of mostly NCOs, if not exclusively NCOs, who are gathered to basically oversee the training of these, like, originally, like, they start off as like 11 to 13 year olds, basically 10, maybe 10 to the youngest, mostly 11 to 13 year olds who are brought in and then trained like how, hey, this is how you march, this is how you go over obstacles and all that stuff. Basically the sort of stuff you would do in basic training and AIT and all those sorts of things, except they're doing it young, because then they have them as like these really well-honed sort of child soldiers, basically, so they can then train them how to be they can train them with the special abilities they give them, which is the sci-fi aspect, which in this case is like precognition and telepathy. Basically giving these commando soldiers the ability to read other people's minds and like see the future and stuff like that, so they can be like even better, A+ commandos. But there's a character in there in Alphas that Derwin hasn't met yet, because he hasn't gotten the chance to read this yet, but he will at some point, I'm sure, named Master Sergeant Atembo, Atembo, and she is.
I need to ask, why did you choose the name Atembo? What does it mean?
I just like the sound of it.
It sounds good.
I think I know what it is. There's a character. Have you seen The Lost World, Jurassic Park?
I did. I was not a fan.
That makes me.
Jurassic World's my favorite. Sorry, Jurassic Park's my favorite movie.
Yep. Oh, your favorite movie of all time?
Jurassic Park, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. I won't sing Lost World praises. I liked it because I saw it at a young age. But
I did too. And the thing is, it's probably better than I will mid it to be. I just think it's definitely a step down.
Oh yeah, definitely a step down. But I think that like the reason I bring it up is just the character Roland Tembo, Pete Postlewaite's character. That's
who
probably
Steven
where I got.
Spielberg said was the greatest actor in the world.
Yeah, I think I remember hearing about that. And it's funny because there's a song that I actually heard on the radio coming back from Derwin's house like a month or two ago called "Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner" by Warren Zevon, and it's basically the story of this like mercenary.
Like a Warren Zevon song.
You should look it up. You should both look it up. It's the story. It's one of the. I love songs that tell stories, and this is basically a song that tells a story of a guy who was a mercenary from Norway during the Congo War in the 1960s, and he was killed by the CIA. He was betrayed by one of his fellow mercenaries on the orders of the CIA, and then as a headless like ghost, he like continued to fight and got his revenge and all these other things. It's really interesting. The reason that's important is because apparently that song is a favorite of David Koepp, who was a screenwriter who wrote a lot of Steven Spielberg movies and other movies like that. And he wrote Lost World, Jurassic Park, among others. And he put Roland Tembo as as like the big game hunter character, sort of as a shout out to that song. And I took the last name Tembo and just had to put an A on the front of it and said, "Hey, Tembo. I've got this sort of hard ass, master sergeant she's basically, again, I'm referring back to Halo: The Fall of Reach. There's a character in Halo: The Fall of Reach called Chief Petty Officer Mendez, who's the like leader of the cadre for these Spartan candidates. He's like initially 6-year-olds who were brought in, and like the first you meet him before this, but like the first introduction that the Spartan characters really get to him is like he's like, I'm trying to set the scene so you can get a little bit of the context that I got when I was like 8 or 9 reading this. He's like, it's like you hear him shout. It says, wake up, trainee. Because I just listened to it on Audible, so I just had the audio book version of this drilled into me too. He shouts at John to wake up, and John kind of rolls over and goes back to sleep. And then Mendez hits him with a stun baton and says, "Don't you know what way up is, boot?" So obviously extreme, but that's kind of what colored my understanding from an early age. So
I explained to Nick about trainees was how they are protected incredibly.
Yep.
And how like like in Starship Troopers when that guy throws a knife through that guy's hand, I'm like, well, you can't just like stab trainees. Like,
I mean, you want to, but you're discouraged.
Yeah.
I think it stands to be said right now that in Halo: The Fall of Reach, there's a couple of extenuating circumstances, primarily that it's set like 500 years in the future. So the standards of like how people live and what's tolerable are probably altered for one thing. But there's also the fact that like the Spartan candidates are basically considered military property.
Well, here's an interesting angle. I'm not sure if you've thought about like in terms of researching this or like even like what the structure of the book is yet. But have you thought about talking to some recruiters? Because like, is the recruitment part of the story, or does it begin with them at like day zero?
It basically begins with them at day zero.
Okay.
In alphas, because it's a story, and again, I'm kind of jumping around, so forgive me for not having like a good like solid pitch and like beat by beat thing to explain this. Alphas kind of jumps around in time, because the first chapter is kind of like a flash forward. Like it's actually a prologue. The first chapter is the prologue rather. It's like them when they're like on their way to war, when they're like 19 or 20 years old, and they're on their way to war for the first time. Then it flashes back to like 20 years earlier, when the guy who masterminded this training program is like pitching the program to some select like general staff from Aerocom, which is Aerospace Command, which is basically like kind of like the Joint Chiefs of Staff, if you want to put it a certain way. He's basically pitching this program to them, and they're kind of like, well, why do we want to listen to you? And he's like, well, this is why. And then the next chapter, it flashes forward another like 10 years to the middle, where the like, again, like 11 to 13-year-old kids are showing up on Titania, which is a moon of Uranus, for training. And
I'm 13. I'm gonna laugh at that.
oh, you're. That's why I said Uranus. I didn't say Uranus.
I know, but in my mind, I heard it better.
Yeah, but yeah. It was originally Triton, but the lore changed a little bit. It couldn't be Triton anymore because Triton is like it was like a non-aligned planet. But yeah, because Triton's a moon of Neptune, which is actually what's behind me here. Anyway, they show up on Titania.
I was about to say, why so blue?
Yeah. They show up on Titania basically on day 0, and they're introduced to Master Sergeant Atembo, and then they're shown their barracks, and then it basically just sort of continues on through their training. And like, because this is something I kind of picked up from Derwin, but also something that I kind of do in my own writing. I don't like how to describe this. In the Halo Fall of Reach book, which is again like kind of my text for a lot of these secret military program training, child soldiers basically. It kind of jumps to their training as well, because it doesn't go through every week of training, like week by week, every month of training, month by month, that sort of thing. It hits some of the bigger beats, like it hits when they're inducted, it hits like their first day, it hits their first day of, which is like their first day of PT, and like on the we're doing like obstacle courses and stuff like that, which is like training them to be the Spartans they eventually come to be. It hits the main beats. That's kind of what I'm doing, especially because in alphas the training isn't the main point. It's the training is kind of getting them. The training is the training scenes are basically vehicles to get the candidate, the alpha characters ready for the Frontier Wars, which is what they go off and fight. So the main thing that I think, I won't say I'm looking for because that has like the wrong connotation. Like the main thing I'm going for here is just trying to see like what is the best way to depict basically a training NCO. Because again, I got this preconceived notion of what Master Sergeant Atembo, and I guess also her subordinates would be like. But you know more about that, obviously, having lived it.
Well, I think these are the questions you need to start asking yourself. At what point in their career are these training cadre? Because if this is such a structured life, like are they cycle after cycle after cycle? Is that fatigue wearing out on them? Because I mean, if you're going without cycle breaks, you're gonna burn yourself out, which means you're gonna be like, hey, just punish yourself. I'm tired. I need a Red Bull. So I would say, with all of the training cadre, identify where in their careers are they, or also were they in this training, this alpha training recruitment? So is there any empathy, or were they just picked from a different unit and assigned to this? Because I feel like the more interesting characters, they'd be the ones who've been in their boots and been like, okay, listen, I'm going to be harsh because I know that this is going to help you get to where I am.
Yep. There's actually a line like that. It's not in the book yet, but it's definitely in the, I'm writing the book and a screenplay based on it at the same time, which is always fun because you have to code switch between types of writing. But there's a line in the screenplay that I've definitely already written where there's basically three, they're kind of like adoptive parents in a way. There's basically three parental figures for these trainees, the alphas. There's Colonel Wastani, who's the military mastermind of the program. There's Dr. Tlaylock, who's the scientist mastermind of the program, and then there's Master Sergeant Atembo, who's actually the head of their training. Actually is executing their training on the ground as the NCO. There's a scene in the story where it's the third anniversary of them having been inducted into the program and started their training. They're being given their number designations because they've been referred to solely as their given names for the past 3 years. Now they're being get designated like John, the main character. Yes, I named him John after John from Halo. So sue me, Microsoft. I don't give a shit.
I think you'll be okay.
His name becomes Alpha 98, Alpha 98, Alpha 098. Sort of like John, the Spartan 117 in Halo. And when they're getting their designations, one of these characters refers to another character by his given name, and one of the cadre kind of comes down and says, "You will use the name you've been given." And the Dr. Tlaylock tries to intervene on his behalf. And it's like, there's still kids, for God's sake. Give them a break. But Atimbo stepped in and is like, "No, you go easy on them now. Then the world is not going to go easy on them. When we send them to Titan or to Callisto or something, and they have to have their wits about them, being lax with them now is not going to pay them off in kind," or something like that. I can't remember exactly what I said, but it's kind of that thing. It's kind of like that, this program was created for these kids, so it's like this is something that no one else has done before. But she's like a 20-year combat veteran. She spent time in the Draconis Crisis and all that stuff, which is again a piece of lore from this universe. She knows what the stakes are, and she knows that if they coddle these children, if they coddle them, they're just going to learn bad habits and go easy on themselves, and they won't have the toughness, I guess you could say, to survive in the real world. If that makes any sense.
I want to push back on that a little bit, Nick.
Go ahead.
You say coddling children. I think there might be some more nuance to explore there, because, like an 18-year-old is going to react differently than a 13-year-old who is going to react differently than a 25-year-old. And going soft on a 25-year-old is bad, because they should be like a fully developed human by that point. But I wonder if there's more nuance to being strict on a 13-year-old, but within like how, granted, okay, so I married a lady who teaches 12-year-olds, so I've had a lot of discussions about what's age appropriate behavior for a 12 to 13-year-old. And so my thinking is that, and maybe this is thinking of it from a middle school perspective, not a child soldier perspective, but I know from what my wife has taught me that to get a 12 and 13-year-old to do stuff, you have to treat them in a specific way, allowing them to kind of sometimes play as a form of self-teaching, self-learning, and stuff like that. So it can't be all like blood, gallons of blood all the time, or maybe you make a game of the blood, and but I think if you structure your drill instructors to treat the 13-year-olds like 18-year-olds, like 25-year-olds, it's not going to work. Hold on a second. Hey, get the fuck away from my TV. Sorry.
Derwin, be nicer to Megan, okay? She puts up a lot of your bullshit.
It's my cats, man. They're like
sure.
I'll show you. Like, listen, I love my wife, but I love this TV almost as much. And like, my cats were running circles around that TV, and I was like, you trash cats, I will dump you in a fucking dumpster. Anyway, sorry, I love my TV.
Well, Nick, I think something else that might be a good resource. You keep hitting on the fact that these are child soldiers. Have you thought about doing some research into like real life child soldiers in developing countries?
That's a very good point. That's not something I had thought of, because I think not to push back on what Derwin was saying, definitely, because what you just said, offering like your perspective that you gleaned from talking with Meg is very good points. I think the thing about the Alphas program is that they're not trying to raise, and again, this is kind of sad to say, but they're not trying to raise well mentally adjusted teenagers. They're trying to raise
killers.
They're trying to raise killers. So if anything, they want them to be a little bit fucked up, basically, because they're raising them to be. I don't know if these like what reference to make. There's like different units that have done stuff like this. Basically, what the Alphas do, what they're intended to do, is infiltrate local populations on like contested or possibly contested worlds, and like gather intelligence and then execute operations on that intelligence. And as a result, because they're being trained to do this from like 11 to 13 years old at first, there's a certain degree of like how the military is kind of like, yeah, we don't really give a shit if they're like if their feelings are hurt. We want them to be tough because we know that if they're not, that if we they'll use the lessons that, yes, honestly, we have learned as a society, especially as our contemporary society has learned in the last 20 to 30 odd years of how to teach children and how you should like teach a certain way. They would say, screw that. We need to do this, and this, because we don't want to have them be almost like, it's basically almost saying, you don't want them to be well adjusted. You want them to be hardcore from day one.
Well, are you?
Go ahead.
I guess I'm trying to think about how would I raise an army of child soldiers. I've never thought about this stuff before. So
I would take away their iPads.
I mean, that's the first step.
Are either of you fans of Cracked.com?
Yes.
So Cracked made a video. This is a decade ago. But when Hunger Games got released, which was how the first Hunger Games went down, and it's a guy in the arena, and he's calling back headquarters like, "Hey, happy Hunger Games to you too, sir." So the kids, they're not so much killing each other as just playing. Yeah, they're just kind of playing with each other, the swords and whatnot. They're just kind of like play sword fighting. The teenagers are in the woods making out, and I see one of them is smoking. And it's sort of like, again, what does it take to get children to turn into bloodthirsty killers? So I would say if you could maybe research a bit of actual child soldiers, but I mean the Hunger Games comparison is not totally off the mark, I think, in terms of again, what motivated them. They were starving. They were raised to believe that this was normalized.
Yeah, to get anybody to believe that, I mean, to even march in step with a bunch of people and to go off into a strange world or a strange country and kill folks. What you got?
What is their motivation to kill? What I mean is there a reward at the end of all of this? Because I mean, is it the honor of serving their country? Because again, to get anyone to do anything, you need a strong motivation, and maybe it's if you die in battle, you ascend to Valhalla, kind of that kind of situation.
That's where I was going. Look at the Westboro Baptist Church. Look at the people with the strong, they will indoctrinate children to believe such evil, horrendous shit from a real early age, and they'll sing about it with a smile. Because they know in their bones, they know that's the way, the truth, and the light. So what I'm saying is with these child soldiers, don't approach it strictly from a dominant, submissive perspective. I'm the NCO, I'm the dominant one, and you will listen to me. And if you don't, I just double down more. Like I said last episode, Nick, get them to buy in. What does it take children to buy in? Mm-hmm. I think the religion angle is pretty good.
That's a very good point. I don't know if religion's necessarily the way I'm going to go, just for my own reasons, but something along those lines is
serving. Because Starship Troopers angle maybe more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's again going back to my text. In the Halo, the Fall of Reach, and the Spartan 2 program, basically the way they indoctrinate these kids is, first and foremost, they abduct them when they're 6 years old. So they're still very much forming who they are as people. And then basically they teach them every day in the classroom, they teach them not this is how you spell, this is how you use grammar. They're basically teaching them military history, tactics, and all these other things. And they're teaching them, hey, in addition to this is why you should serve the UNSC unflinchingly, and why the UNSC brings order to organized space and blah blah blah, stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff I'm thinking of, kind of stuff where it's basically teaching these teenagers, well, you have a chance to make a difference, and basically and to make it such that the rest of the solar system doesn't devolve into chaos, and they're kind of yeah, it sounds good, because a lot of them are taken from broken homes, a lot of them are orphans. That's basically why they were chosen, because they're the kid no one will miss. And as a result, it's a little bit at least I think it would be anyway, it's a little bit easier to sort of drill into this notion that, yeah, you can make your life mean something, and the way you can do that is by taking in these skills that you can then utilize to, affect the lives of billions.
I have an idea.
Go ahead.
And again, you're, like we established, you're the final approving authority on the Spacer Saga. And don't dismiss religion just quite yet. Let me throw this at you. They abduct the children. It's a Valhalla style religion, right? Where like they're warrior, whatever. And they say, hey, if you serve and you die in battle, you get to earn your soul back. And like you give this sort of, and so when the children are like, oh, but you have to die in battle for it to work, right? Kind of, it's a little bit of original sin, how in the Christian doctrine, mythology, whatever you want to call it, you have to accept the blood of the lamb, and then you have to accept the sacrifice. Salvation didn't come without a sacrifice, right, in Christianity. So you're kind of playing off of that. That's a recognizable trope to most Western audiences. And then if I'm a child soldier and I'm like, it gives you this incentive because you only know this like two-dimensional world that's the size of a training compound, because you were brought there when you were 6. You had just learned how to poop on your own, right? You had just learned how to tie your shoes. So you don't really have all your motor skills down yet, let alone cognitive like recall, let alone understanding what a soul is. But you could say, hey, if you're here, then that means your soul was forfeited, but to get it back, you have to die in battle somehow, right? Mm-hmm. You could have instances where kids have like a murder-suicide to try to get their souls back because they just want to go to heaven and see their parents, right? Because their parents had souls. They say, oh, well, your mom and dad, they died in battle and they got their souls back. And they got to live forever in Valhalla. And so for you to see your mommy and daddy, that's what you got to do. Just spitballing ideas at you.
Let me play with that, because again, I don't know how much of it I'll use, how much I'll set aside or what, but I like some of the ideas you're tossing out, because there was a thing I wrote, little thing you most might not know about me. I know you don't, Pete, because obviously we don't talk, which is fine. I'm not like criticizing, obviously. That's just, I miss you too, Peter. Is it Peter, by the way?
You can call me Pete.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know if it was
like calls me Peter. It's like hi, mom and dad.
That's pretty much what I tell everybody too. Like when I get called Nicholas, I'm like, oh shit, what I do wrong? There's my dad sitting right here. He could confirm this. There's a famous story from our family where he says if my grandmother, that is his mother, were to call Jeff, he'd come. If he called Jeffrey, he'd come quick. And if she called Jeffrey Wayne Oaks, he'd run in the other direction. Yeah,
for me, it was Peter Barlow, Peter Sachs Barlow, and then Peter Sachs, Gallagher, Murphy, Myers, Erickson, Byrne, Barlow. Get in here right now. I'm like, you're just making up names at this point.
Is that your full name?
Well, my full name is Peter Sachs Barlow, but Peter Sachs, Gallagher, Murphy, Myers, Erickson, Byrne, Barlow. It's just like just throw the family tree at me.
Oh, okay. All right. So she's 23andMe in your whole name.
It was just like summon the ancestors. The rage. It's like, we left Sweden for this? This child who's not eating his vegetables?
But anyway,
sorry.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm just continuing my rant of like, we were starving to death, but the food your mother prepared for you is not enough.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to go back to what Derwin was talking about, there was something I wrote earlier today in my notes, because one of the things I do as a weird writer habit is I keep notes in my like Samsung like notes keeper on my phone, and I'll like put down quotes that I want to use in the story, and I'll put down like things about the story that I don't want to forget. Like it's basically a way to keep track of things, of like thoughts that I have at 2 a.m. when I'm staying up late writing, and I know that I won't remember them when I get up in the morning after going to sleep eventually. And I wrote this thing just down earlier today where, again, the character John, Alpha 98, says again, forgive me if this is hackneyed, because this is what I do as a writer. But he says, some soldiers hesitate to kill because they fear what it will do to their soul, or they fear that it will destroy their soul. I hesitated because I knew deep down that it wouldn't.
I like it.
And the reason I thought of that is because I was thinking about the fact that, everybody always talks about, there's that famous line from Unforgiven, it's a hell of a thing to kill a man. You take away all he's got and all he's ever going to have. Well, the flip side of that is, what if it doesn't do anything to you? Is that not worse? If you kill something. I'm
sorry.
Go ahead.
Finish. No, you finish. You go first.
I was going to say, is that not in a way worse to take a life and realize, I don't feel any different? All it took was trigger pull.
Have you seen Lawrence of Arabia?
Yes.
Okay, so what that made me think of was when Peter O'Toole makes it back to Egypt, and he's like, "I killed a man," and it's like, "Oh, that's okay. You're a soldier. You're gonna kill people." No, the problem is I liked it. Yeah. And it's just like that's so much more disturbing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This exactly. All more disturbing coming from this character who's just fresh-faced, blue-eyed, innocent, and it's just like, holy crap, this guy's a sadist.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, we're coming up on about 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any? And this will be 2 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any final questions for Pete in regards to a drill sergeant life?
I think we've hit on a good bit of stuff. If I was to say anything else, it would be basically just how from your perspective, because again, something I touched on earlier in our chat tonight, where I said that the media, especially like movies and TV and stuff, and so on, portray drill sergeants, especially usually as like the enemy, or drill instructors as the enemy character, like the antagonist character in the narrative. Obviously, as you touched on before, Gunnery Sergeant Hartman in Full Metal Jacket is portrayed as the antagonist character, even though if we want to look at it from the perspective of someone who's been in the military for a few years, he's not really an antagonist, and if anything, is just trying to do his job. So it comes down to perspectives. How would you tackle that sort of dialectic where you have Go ahead.
This keeps happening.
No, you're fine.
I think I got the question. I would say make sure that you are writing the training cadres being human. Even if they're not the main characters, include subtext or at least hints. Because it's a very taxing job, and it takes its toll on you. I definitely drank way too much when I was on the trail. One of my favorite memories was we had the cadre chat, on our phones. And when the pandemic first started, we each sent pictures of what bottle of liquor we were working on that night, and it was just this very humanizing moment of even under this stressful circumstances, we have to be the epitome of professionalism. It's just listen, I'm a human being, and after a really long week, it's just I need some scotch. So make sure to humanize them is what I'm saying.
And I think I know a perfect way to do that. One that comes to mind off the cuff is, imagine, because after these alphas are in this training program for a couple of years, they start getting taught how to read each other's minds and read other people's minds and see the future. The training cadre would probably be a little weirded out by that, I would figure. It's you'd probably have some cadre who maybe some of the kids are more troublesome than others, maybe them are more doodle or more straight-laced than others, but now they're starting to hey, I can read your mind, because there's actually a scene that does take place in the narrative where one of them is confronting a kid for doing something out of line, and the kid responds by saying, "Hey, wait a second, you've been sending messages to somebody on Callisto, which is an enemy world. What's all that about?" It's the others confront him, and basically they take him away to be questioned, and it turns out that he was
talking to a girl.
I would. My first thought there is that they wouldn't set up a dynamic where a trainee could have power over a trainer.
Mm-hmm.
Because in that dynamic, if you as Private First Class Oaks can read my mind, and then you can pick out, because the idea is for me to be a position of authority,
mm-hmm.
and not to be not to you as a trainee, I'm assuming, and not to be a person, but a drill sergeant, position of authority, cadre, whatever. But if you're going to, in my mind, pick out all my weaknesses, picking me apart, whatever, then that would disrupt the fabric of the training environment, I would assume. So what I would say is there would be some sort of like blockage to where they couldn't read the cadres' minds.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because, well, a couple things. One thing to support that idea, one thing to refute that idea. I'll give you both. The one thing to refute that idea, for one thing, is that the mental adaptation training that they start having doesn't take place for like 3 to 5 years after they've been in the program. So by then they're basically, rank and file. Not rank and file. What's a better way to describe it? They're basically trained up to as much as they can be, militarily speaking. By that point, the training cadre are basically there just to sort of get them to and from class and stuff. But on the other hand, go ahead.
Wouldn't have a position where a lower enlisted could have any sort of like undue power over a higher enlisted. Otherwise, it breaks down the hierarchy.
Here's what I'll say to that: the alphas do not have traditional rank, and even a 16-year-old alpha trainee, whatever, is technically not in the like rank hierarchy of the Spacer Corps, because it's kind of like how in the Spartan, it's kind of like how, again, in Halo, the Spartans are given ranks so they can have like a place within the UNSC military apparatus, but they're also kind of rankless. So
okay, but you're gonna have then the training cadre is serving a purpose. Like if they're supposed to teach them to be soldiers, but they don't have the authority of training cadre over them,
that's a good point,
the way you would a soldier, then they serve no purpose. Like the logic of it down.
I gotta workshop this, I guess.
All right.
We're workshopping it right now.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Well, actually, I was gonna say now might not be a bad time to wrap things up because I'm tired and I want to go to bed.
Thank you for being here, Pete.
Thank you for having me. This was fun. It's always nice talking to you two.
Yep, absolutely.
Pete, I miss you. I adore you. I'm so grateful every time we get to speak.
Absolutely, man. And I cannot wait to meet up with you again in person and we can both go to an open mic.
That would be
I want to see that.
I want to invite you.
If you were ever doing one in, say, Evansville is a place, or like Louisville, maybe. Louisville is a thing I could probably hit.
Louisville, Kentucky?
Yeah. If you're probably not that far west, are you?
I'm trying to I'm not too far. I've driven through Kentucky. I think Louisville's a little too far west for me to feasibly drive. But I do know that, you're in Indy, but you also have connection to Dayton, and I've got a lot of friends in Ohio who want to see me perform.
The next time you're at stand up in Dayton, Nick and
we can try to work out something.
We'll figure it out.
All right. Yep. Well, gentlemen, have a fantastic day, and until later.
All right, Pete. Thank you for coming on.
All right, later.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Always good to see you.
All right. Is that just us now, sir?
Yep.
I think. Yep. Oh, yep. Yep. Okay, he's gone. What'd you think of that?
I liked it. Yeah, and I like you bringing up some points that I hadn't thought of. That's always good. That's what workshopping is all about. Because when it comes down to like alphas don't have rank. They have a place in the rank structure, but they're kind of like a special place in the rank structure because they can like choose to ignore the rank structure if they have to, if that makes any sense.
That would not function. That would not work at all. Let me tell you this, so you could have so there were officer cadets, right? Mm-hmm. And I'd see them and they had little black circles as rank, mm-hmm. And they were one day going to be lieutenants. And they were they don't know anything. And if you're a part of a hierarchical organization, the house always wins every single time. Every single time the house wins, the hierarchy wins. Every decision, every decision, every choice is made in support of the hierarchy. So you wouldn't have a situation where members of the hierarchy could have undue influence above their station in that said hierarchy,
Mhm.
because otherwise it falls apart.
Yeah.
And you know, like those, like the cadets, you know, we called them sir just to kind of get them used to hearing it, but like they would stand at parade rest for me. I don't think they had to, but I let them, because you know, I was nice to them, but like, you know, they were fucking sophomore college students who didn't know anything. They barely knew how to tie their fucking boots. And so, you know, when homeboy's a lieutenant, then you're gonna listen to him. But if that lieutenant has half a brain in his head, he's going to greatly defer to experience. Now with these kids, these special child soldiers, special operators, whatever, in this training environment, now out in the wild, them being free agents like James Bond, and rank not being a factor makes sense.
Yeah.
On the compound, in the training environment, the hierarchy has to rule above all else, especially like, imagine if you got a bunch of super soldiers and they're training at a secret lair and they have superpowers and they don't feel like they have to listen to, say, the chief of staff of the army.
Yeah.
And then they decide, oh, well, we'll just kill him and then murder the president. And then, like, you know, like, you get what I'm saying? Like, it unravels that fast. You get, like, imagine, did you see, what's that show on Amazon? There's like Superman, but he's evil.
Oh, yeah. The Boys.
Yes.
You ever seen Akira?
No, but stay with me. So imagine The Boys. The Boys kind of plays with this a little bit. Imagine The Boys. You've got this evil Superman character, but they have him in this hierarchy where the company is knows all, right? If he just went wild, did whatever the fuck he wanted, we'd lose whole cities. And so keep that in mind when you write this story. If you are writing a military training environment, the hierarchy always wins.
Mm-hmm.
The structure of that environment, of the community, of the organization is going to be centered to where the hierarchy always wins. The hierarchy would not create a situation that might endanger itself, because because its purpose is to perpetuate itself. And so it perpetuates itself by controlling all the variables and establishing a society that supports said hierarchy. It's not going to, you know, let wild card variables just destroy everything.
Yep.
And so if you got trainees, if you private first class Oaks can read my mind and tell people how I cheated on my taxes and I ran over somebody and didn't tell anybody, whatever, and destroy my life, well, then you gain power in the hierarchy, and the other trainee cadre are like, you know, they're like, oh, he fucked with me, so that he might fuck with you, might fuck with them too. And so then they lose power over you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
which on the one hand is an interesting dynamic to explore, but on the other hand, it doesn't really work for the kind of story that I'm looking to do. Because if anything, what I could do is maybe say something like, oh, well, there were some incidents early on where they realized, oh, we better do something to keep the trainees from reading the cadre's minds. And it's sort of like even like a throwaway line, even something like, oh, well, they created, did you ever watch the Justice League cartoon back in the day?
Just say they put like they wear a special hat or something.
Yeah, basically.
Like whatever it does.
There's like a special band to put in their campaign covers that keeps their thoughts from being read.
There you go. But sir, I think it's been about 2.5 hours.
Yeah. I'm sorry, buddy.
You were okay. I was having a great time.
Yeah.
I'm glad you
Wait
got
a sec,
to.
Dad.
I'm glad you got to take Pete's brain. I'm glad you got to talk to him.
Absolutely.
But
Me too.
We'll sign off from here. So
right.
For the Bowling Fortress of Solitude, I'm Derwin.
I'm Nick.
And we will see you next Monday morning at 0700. Okay.
Hello, stranger. Do you like to read?
Read? What's happening? Am I dead?
I bet you like zombie books.
I like food. Do you have food?
You don't need food at dividedbyzerobooks.com. It's full of nutrient-rich science fiction.
Ugh, I'm stuck in an ad, aren't I?
Once I stop talking, reality will collapse until someone plays this ad again. This isn't the first time we've had this discussion, and it won't be the last. Hello, stranger. Do you like to read?
It was exactly 1 month after I got to Iraq. Passed the PT test today. Not by a whole lot. Always a proud moment with every milestone I have. The things I've seen, the hijinks that ensue.